Well, Lord Starfires, thank you for the magnanimous introduction there. Really appreciate it. All right, so first of all, welcome, Deb. Really appreciate you joining us here. We started the morning with Jim Snabe basically painting a great vision of the autonomous enterprise. And then that was followed, not the 5-year-old English teacher. That was followed by Nikhil taking us through a whirlwind of the technology that actually enables that. And I would say, Deb, now this is the hard part, which is how do you operationalize all that in a massive Fortune 500 company? So thank you for joining us to kind of tell us how to do this. Maybe we can start with Dow and the complexity of operating a business like Dow, and just paint the picture for us as current state.
Yeah, well, before I do that, I want to thank you for inviting us to be a part of today. It is a great honor to be here. And amongst such great colleagues, when I think about like the purpose of coming, I just want to thank you and the entire team at C3 AI for getting us together, because it is really valuable to share the stories with each other and hear where you're going. So thank you for that.
Super.
Yeah. And again, thank you for the great intro about Dow. I feel like, magnanimous is quite nice how you put that. But for those who may not know who Dow really is at the end of the day, we are a 130-year-old company. So we kind of have some legacy about how we work. We are a materials science company. We operate with about 100 different locations that you can think about. We have 35,000 employees around the world. And we operate some of the world's most complex and energy-intensive assets. And so when I think about that, we then transform chemistry into great products. It is true, you are surrounded by Dow, from the chairs we sit in, to the lipstick on my face, to the shoes we're wearing, to the clothes we have on. But you also have to think about some of the fun things that we do, right? I think a lot about this room might care about data centers, and we think about moving from water cooling to liquid cooling, to the silicone that might be on the chipset or in your phone. So you can think about us in a lot of different ways, but all that complexity ties back to our really big assets. And I love to tell people these fun facts. One of them alone is like the size of Manhattan. Right, 3 miles by 3 miles is a facility. So now you think about that asset, how do we take care of it? And that is where some of our partnership comes into play. But those are really important things to us to keep running to serve all of our customers and you around the world.
So that's the core, and the upstream, if you will, are these, I guess you call them steam crackers.
Yes.
So massively energy intensive, massively complicated to operate units. And when those things are operating well, everything downstream of that, all the products that you produce into the various end markets are basically flowing through. That's actually where we started our journey, Deb, which is asset performance or asset utilization. So if you can improve the asset utilization by 1%, makes a massive difference to Dow, and obviously keeping it running, but also improving the efficiency. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about the journey there.
Yeah, well, and I think one of the great partnership elements between us and C3 is the knowledge you bring. And that is not easy to impress our team members with having extensive knowledge. So I think let's start there with the high caliber of people and the knowledge you brought to the table. But also this partnership word, and I do mean that seriously, in that within Dow, and you might imagine in an environment where I think the numbers, we have like 1,600 PhDs, we have this real value of insight and knowledge and thousands of engineers, when we can put those two together. And I think that's really been the nice partnership, is we've been able to take our knowledge and our IP and our internal capabilities and models and match them with C3 and the platform to really focus. And in this particular instance, we're talking about our asset and increasing asset reliability. And so working together wasn't flawless to begin with, right? As most things, you've got to work through and tweak these things. But I think we've been really pleased with the partnership. And then, of course, we started in a certain class, and now we're also extending beyond. So starting about very narrow, and that was our approach. I know different companies have a different approach, but right, we try to be very narrow within the landscape of DAO to prove value and then extend to a broader set of our assets.
And I think the point about your PhDs and data sciences, et cetera, I think DAO is now self-sufficient at basically configuring models, tuning models, deploying models. So that actually was, it started with C3 doing some of that work on and partnering with the domain expertise that DAO has on operating steam crackers and furnaces and all that. But very quickly, DAO became self-sufficient at actually using C3 to tune their own models. And so that was an important part of the consideration, right?
For us, for sure, right, is to be independent well, we're good at asset operations, right? So this is not too dissimilar. It's an asset that we want to operate. But we're also having conversations, are there other places to use, in this case, the platform or an asset to us to broaden across the landscape of DAO and get more value?
And the journey, I think, is very similar to what Nikhil presented that Coke FHR is on, which is it's hard to use, but it's autonomous site operations. But obviously, you have to be very extremely concerned about the safety of the operations. So autonomous is not a light word to use in the context of DAO.
No, and hey, if we didn't have to have people operating, there'd be a great thing if they were fully safe and secure. But I think we have to wait some time and distance before we're going to really be in that situation today, where we're not going to have people there to oversee the decisions or at least surround. So for sure, I love the idea of fully autonomous. There just has to be a lot of proof points on the way for us to get there.
So it's like the assisted lane versus completely autonomous.
It's somewhere between. I think it's somewhere between gyms 2 and 5, right? I think we're a little bit. We're in the assisted, but we're advancing a bit. And our aspiration is probably be somewhere in there.
Got it. Super. So DAO announced this massive transformation, which is super impressive, Deb. I think it's called Transform to Outperform. Could you give some context on that, and actually the choice of Transform to Outperform as the title for it?
Yeah, and so maybe similar to some of the people in the room, that we have had 3 years of being in the bottom of a cycle. And that has proven to be financially difficult. And we are underperforming for where we would like to be. So just having said that, we are also looking really internally at ourselves and saying, okay, we have got to transform the way we work. There's all sorts of capabilities that we should be embracing. As I mentioned, we're a 130-year-old company. We might have some legacy ways of working that we need to challenge constructively and really try to do differently. So our ambition is to take out $2 billion of cost.
$2 billion.
$2 billion is the number. And so when we think about that, our aspirations are going to come from growth, but there's also some aspirations that are going to come internally. And so internally, it's going to be, how do we get more efficient? How do we streamline? How do we really look at the way we work? And then, of course, when we do that, AI and automation are a portion of it. I'm not quite sure how the media wants to cover that, but it seems sometimes there's a higher correlation that AI is solving all those issues. It's not, but it is an important ingredient in the steps forward for us. But really, transform to outperform is what it is, right? Like, if we can transform internally, then we are going to outperform the competition. And at the end of the day, that's what we want to do. We want to beat the competition to satisfy you, our customers, at the end of the day.
So give an example or two of that. So it's operating more nimbly in the customer side and then the operations side. Can you bring it to life a little bit?
I can bring that to life for you. And if you allow me to talk about, maybe I'll intertwine AI a moment for you, right?
Absolutely.
If you allow me to do that. Because it isn't wholly going to be AI, but I do want to at least share a bit about this. So when we think about, or at least I try to talk about AI internally, I try to talk about it in 3 ways. One is you as a person, right? You have your own AI. You're going to have your own AI agents. Hopefully you're all loving Copilot in your daily lives. Our leaders love it to help at year-end review time, right? Like, it's certainly making you more efficient. And then the other 2 ways that I would be thinking about AI, at least within the landscape of DAO, is from our end-to-end processes. So you can think of your standard order to cash, processes, right? When we think about like how do we have the start and the end, hire to retire, any of these end-to-end processes, we are starting to look at how do we use AI agents and other automation more extensively than we have historically. The third way I would talk about AI, and do talk about it, is within specific domains. So within R&D, how are we using AI to help us get to innovations faster? But that doesn't really affect the finance team, right? It's really contained within a domain. And this is where we often talk about C3 today for us, is playing in the domain of our operations space. You are helping us make our assets more efficient, and we're using AI in that regard. But to stitch that all together in Transform to Outperform, we're really evaluating end to end and those processes and practices and streamlining the way we do the work we do. And where will AI be a big part of that, or just simply streamlining the processes we have? Supply chain planning might be a good place to think about in terms of streamlining to transform the way we work and outperform where we are today and where our competition is.
Super, but I like that framework. It actually mirrors a little bit of what Nikhil was presenting.
It does.
So
and that was not planned. That was not,
that was not
we
planned.
didn't plan that ahead of time.
So I think Dow, you've identified order of 9 end-to-end processes.
Yeah, 9 or 10, somewhere in the direction,
Directionally correct. And then for each of those, there might be supporting domain-specific capabilities that get orchestrated.
Correct.
And then there's team-level automation. That's kind of the third layer in this process. And so when you pull all this together, Dow transforms, so you basically are forecasting better what products are needed so that you can schedule production better, so that you can have the right levels of inventory, and so you can serve the customer on time and full.
Exactly, you've got it.
That's the picture.
That is the picture.
Directionally.
And again, for maybe if this is relatable to some, but within the landscape of Dow, we have some businesses that are truly more of a commodity type business. And then we have a specialty type business. And you know that those are different in terms of sophistication and complexity for sure. If you try to manage your working capital in a certain way to optimize what is good for your commodity business, it's actually not great for your specialty businesses, right? Because you're trying to reduce your working inventory. So we're trying to manage between these dualities that we live in terms of the landscape of Dow. And for sure, to your point about trying to streamline these processes in terms of, can I have a little bit more inventory in these, and how do I optimize for a specialty business, and where can I really get efficient on my commodity business in the inventory? So it is a struggle today. Like I said, we've got some legacy things that we're working on, but our aspiration is to really aggressively, and that's why we're announcing these things, is to aggressively hit at these different ways of working.
And it is aggressive. I mean, your timelines, this is $2 billion, not in 5 years.
No, it's in 2.
2 years.
Yeah, and we already had $1 billion, and like we already had one before we tried to do, so.
So this is moving fast. So maybe turn to Deb, the hard part, which is how do you get everybody on the same page? How do you get IT working with business, working with your commercial, working with, so how do you operationalize this?
Yeah, and it's not an easy thing, right? And I think we all would probably have some commonality in that. I think the number one thing to work on is our collaboration, right? And I think to where we started even with our partnership is you got to work through some of the difficult moments. I think we're all aligned on the prize. Sometimes it's how you get there. And so it's a really strong collaboration that we're trying to bring between the business and the outcomes they need. Our team as a technology team, where is our purpose in helping achieve those outcomes? And then we think about partners like C3, how do we have you be a part of the table? We're not gonna build everything. I love, like again, the platform. And I think Nikhil's question is, are you gonna go build all your own? No, no, we just don't have the time at our pace. How do we strategically think together? Where do we get to leverage a platform and a strong partnership to bring into that intimate circle of really trying to transform yourself? Because you're not gonna bring in every vendor to do that, but where we have strong vendors and strong partnerships, I think is really important to collaborate and work on the really difficult task at hand with candor, with trust, and most importantly, with the results.
Super. And so just to kind of summarize that, where there are pre-built applications, you can roll out very quickly.
Correct.
So that might be like C3I demand forecasting or supply network risk, et cetera. For the long tail, there's C3 code, which you saw. I think you saw this morning, right?
I did give a personal demo this morning because I had to miss some things yesterday, so I appreciate it.
What did you think?
No, actually, my team was, part of my team was with me, and I was like doing a little elbow jab because I was like, oh, hey, we have some really old code, not that any of you have this problem, but we have some tech debt in some of our environments, including like VB6, which I know we're, alone in that category. Everybody else has fixed that problem, but yeah. we were at least saying, hey, that might be really transformative to taking care of some of our tech debt. We had been talking about supply chain and using some capabilities, but with code, we were definitely brainstorming from that venue to this one about where could we really see some capabilities and some value, and how could we go do a pilot on that pretty quickly. And I think everybody's pretty optimistic that there's some real value to be had in the tech debt and remediation of tech debt without maybe as much effort, because we just don't have the time and energy to re-platform all of those things, right?
I hadn't thought about that angle, but that's true. If you can, as Nikhil kind of showed again, if you can express the business problem in English, we can then interpret that and generate code that's consistent to the platform. So it's using all the same ontologies, it's using all the same security and guardrails and interaction with the LLMs, et cetera, to actually recreate and reduce the footprint. There's a lot of IT cost in that area.
Again, and very old assets that are all around the world with different people who created different solutions over a long period of time. It's just too much effort to try to harmonize those all in one big effort. And so it'll be interesting to see. Like we'd love to be a proof point, at least in our brainstorm on the way from there to here, which was, hey, could you help us with that, let alone the other tasks at hand?
Because most IT budgets, I'm not asking about yours here, Deb, just to be clear, is basically in maintenance and keeping the lights on.
It is. Right? And if you want to transform to outperform, how do you lower your cost of maintenance and increase the oxygen you need to do the new fun stuff, right? Yeah. And I think classically, if you're running a technology budget, you're really good if you got 80% maintenance and 20% projects.
Super.
Wouldn't that be fun if that were a little bit different? I mean, I'd love to tip that upside down, but even if I got to 50-50 in a manufacturing world. Now, financials and banks have different metrics to that 80-20 rule, but in our landscape, if we could really pivot that, you could either create the oxygen you need to go do the new things or lower your overall cost.
Super. Something we could talk about.
We will.
Off stage.
Yeah. We can have the team join in, right? Have everybody join in.
Let's do it. Just a couple of other topics. I know Microsoft is a huge partner for Dow.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about how you see kind of C3 and Dow, C3 and Microsoft accelerating Dow's journey?
Yeah, and I think this is what I meant earlier when I was talking about the collaboration we need to transform. Yep. I think we need those few really strong partners. And, trust is earned. I don't know that it's always just granted. And when I think about the partnership, C3 AI and Microsoft come with already a great partnership, and we individually have great partnerships. So I think we're better together when we can come in and deal with the difficult situations. So Microsoft's just been a tremendous asset along the way. In our Azure environment, we're exclusive to Azure in that regard. So we do have high expectations, though, that for both of those companies, you bring us your best resources. And so I do think, as I said earlier on, like you have brought and impressed our organization with some really great talent. And I think the combination of Microsoft's talent, Dow's talent, and C3 AI's talent, I get excited about what else can I challenge you guys with, or what else can we come up with along the way?
Yeah, and C3 is obviously working with Microsoft to integrate and use all their latest services, and then we're working with Dow to make that operationalize that at Dow. There's one other kind of dimension, Deb, that I wanted to touch on, which is you have a innovation arm, which is a technology licensing arm.
I do.
Maybe talk a little bit, just give the audience a little bit of context on that, because I think you package up your IP and show others how to run steam crackers across the globe.
Yeah, I'm gonna do a little bit of a talk about it, but I have some experts in the room. So after this, like if you have interest in understanding innovation, there's a great team here who would be happy to engage more. But if I at the beginning told you about the various expertise we have between our engineering and our PhD chemists, we do, in the traditional material science way, have abilities to license our IP, and that's innovation is the arm that licenses those things. And over time, we have partnered with C3 AI to say what we have created in this space for our assets and how we're actually using C3 AI along with our IP. Should this not be something that we can help others who run furnaces and crackers and assets like we do jumpstart and leapfrog to a solution? So innovation is the way of using what we have co-created and licensing it to others so they can have speed to market instead of having to start at ground zero and benefiting from our investment, but also we can pay it forward and then earn a little bit from that IP along the way.
So that's another dimension of the partnership, which is when we, say, deploy C3 asset performance or reliability into Dow, we're actually incorporating Dow's decoking models, proprietary models, if you will.
Yes.
And then that solution is packaged up and then made available to the industry.
Yep, made available to the industry. Innovation is happy to talk about that and what it might bring to help others, as I said, like accelerate from what we have spent time, because we've been working for a few years together, right? I think we've been 4 years at this. So how do we help you accelerate and get to value as well?
Super. Maybe I can just conclude on what advice would you have, Deb, for this audience that's embarking on their transformations?
Well, you know, it's always an interesting question is what advice do you have? I would really start, and first of all, like the intentions you're trying to achieve. Sometimes I think we approach different efforts like these, which are, hey, I just have a short-term task and I need some sort of result and I'm gonna go fast. And I'm gonna call that a transactional situation. I think when we've approached C3 AI, it's been more about a longer-term journey. And if that is where you're at, then how do you treat this as a partnership where you're trying to say, okay, I'm gonna start here, but with a platform like this, there's a lot of capability that you can have in your future, but staying focused. And I will say we did. We stayed very focused in our asset way, right? In terms of looking at this is where we wanna target. And now through a partnership. So I guess my advice is, are you trying to achieve a short-term tactical solution to fit a problem? Or are you trying to achieve a longer-term partnership with greater outcomes? And again, we've been able to co-create and collaborate and create a better outcome because I think we oriented ourselves on commitment to partnership. And this is quite transformative if you choose it to be. So I would orient myself on that. And then I think the other thing is be open to new ways of working. Like we've really had to explore different approaches. And a trusted partner can hold a mirror up and say, well, yeah, I know you've done it this way, but perhaps we should think about doing it a different way.
That's great. Thank you for that, Deb. It's really consistent with where we're focusing the company on, which is better supporting rapid scale up of these transformations. So it's absolutely consistent with that. We're really looking forward to going on this autonomous Dow journey with you, and really appreciate you joining us today. Deb.
Well,
thank you.
No, thanks for having me, and hopefully everybody has a great transform.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Thanks so much.